Hello, friends. This is Roman from the Paititi Institute, and I'm here with our dear friend Stacy. And today the topic is what is your organism communicating to you and the world around? And I'll just start to introduce this topic briefly. So this talk is based on a premise from many ancient cultures and many different modern tools and practices that relate to this inherent wisdom present in our organism that is continuously communicating to us beyond just our mind or logical processes, but it's happening through the body language, through the experiences of well-being, vitality, or the lack of it. And within many ancient cultures, this wisdom of the organism is communicated through energy, through a life energy. And the life energy is related to the psychic energy, the energy of our feelings and our emotions, and how it's very interwoven with the functioning of our inner organs and our immune system and the rest of the organism. So it's a fascinating perspective that we are working with here in the Institute, and Stacy also is engaging with practices that relate to this energy. And I love to see the connection between the ancestral systems of engaging with this energy as a communication system, and then the more modern ones. So, Stacy, if you want to share a little bit about your background and practice and how you came to it.
Yeah. So my background actually has been in, I started out professionally anyway, in fitness and nutrition. And what I noticed personally for myself and for the people that I was working with was that no matter what, people were doing on the outside, meaning they might have been eating well and they might have been sleeping and working out, that their internal dialogue, emotions, belief systems, connection to community and the universe had a real and measurable effect on their physical body. And so that was kind of my first introduction to it without really knowing anything outside of what modern day tells us, and that kind of began my exploration of how, like you said, this organism actually is constantly telling us things through symbology, through dreams, through emotions and sensations, through body language. And so then I kind of went back to study and to understand more about, well, what is my body actually telling me? What can I learn just by listening? And of course, when I say body, I don't just mean here. I mean also me being embodied in the larger whole.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's kind of what led me down this path of it's just kind of this organic, natural curiosity, I would say. And then I also wanted to read this little quote that I just started reading, this book by Martin Prechel called The Smell of Rain on Dust. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or read his book. Okay. So this just totally struck me. I just read it yesterday, and he says, inside each one of us, sitting like a well-worn jewel in the clear running river of our own soul, present right here today, there is also a deep and noble human being, unknown even to his or her closest neighbor, that more external outer layer of ourselves who has become a personality of the surrounding culture, instead of that true individual, a person indigenous to our own deeper spiritual landscape. And I think that's a beautiful quote that kind of encapsulates what we've been talking about, individually and through all our lives, really, is
Mm-hmm.
this idea that there is a deep inner knowing, and we are, some of our work here is to just allow the body and mind and spirit and universe and consciousness to speak and listen, and then take action, or sometimes not take action, just be. with what is. And I think that's the real true healing, when we connect with that, as he says, the indigenousness of our own deeper landscape.
Well, it's fascinating how Martin Pretel, I have a few friends that work closely with him and have been his students for years. And it's fascinating how he brings that part of the indigenous culture, and I think he works a lot with the Central American culture and heritage. And he brings this perspective how humanity used to be very much interlinked between the inner and the outer experiences of the world. And the human language has also evolved from that, where there was a unity of what we are experiencing, what we are thinking, and the process of our life, what we're feeling, and our entire being. And then today in our world, our human language has gotten localized mostly in the brain, and our body is not so connected to our full range of experiences in life. And a lot of times we're just defending ourselves from so much that is happening in the world by over analyzing and maybe blocking, becoming more numb to the experiences that we're having because we don't know how to deal with them. And here in the Andes, also within the indigenous culture, you can see how within the language, when the people say, there's a very special way to say thank you, which is urpiai sonkoya, and it means a dove flying out of my heart. And within that experience of a dove flying out of my heart, when people, the local people say that, and they're being very sincere when they say that. And so then their heart, you can see how their body language changes, their heart opens up, and there is this opening of the heart center as they're saying the words. And so in the ancient times, and we spoke with Stacy yesterday, and we spoke about the dream work. So a lot of the indigenous cultures, they utilize this very beautiful, poetic dream language, like what Stacy just read right now, and that creates a certain upliftment of energy, a certain perspective of our own being that is not bound by the mundane wear and tear, so to speak. And then that is the language that the indigenous people relate to the dream language. It's the language of symbols, of metaphors, of appearances. And human language in its origin has arisen from that, where the language was very much connected with the direct experience and with a certain expression, the creative expression of our entire being. And then to be able to relate with that. So, of course, over time, then humankind has lost a connection with this poetic language. It's again, we have to live in a certain society that is based on materialistic values today. That hasn't always been the case. And then gradually losing touch with this inner language, the language of our inner muse, our spirit singing, and how essential that is for our vital health. Relate our life situations to a greater purpose, a greater meaning, just like in the excerpt that you read, that there is a greater purpose, there is a mystery within us, and then we can come into a loving relationship with that mystery. We can start to understand that language that encourages us to evolve, to awaken our most noble aspects. And so I really appreciate that perspective and approach, and those are also the lineages that we are working with. And of course, first and foremost, it is encouraging one's own direct experience, to become more intuitive, to get to know oneself, know thyself, right? It's that ancient awareness that is present within many cultures. However, today I have noticed that within the modern approach, then there are many different techniques and tools And there has been this certain tendency to utilize this approach of engaging in a communication with the greater organism and use it more to manipulate, to fix. I don't have to listen so much, but I can do this technique and I can get better at what I do in my life and I can use it to my advantage, which wasn't really the purpose of the ancient traditions. Like with yoga, we can see how it has become a fitness kind of sensation. And the original purpose of it was not that. And then many modern techniques have also come from the premise of ancient traditions, but then use it more to kind of fit into today's society rather than evolve beyond it. So I'm interested to hear your perspective and also a little bit more detail about your background, because you haven't mentioned it, like, so I know that you're a doctor.
Yeah, doctor of natural medicine.
Great.
And the field of focus, though, is psychoneuroimmunology, how our thoughts affect our immune system, endocrine system, so on and so forth, and how those thoughts affect our thinking, feeling, and behaving pattern. So to address the first point, yeah, I completely agree with you around this idea of like fixing, right? I think we spoke a few days ago that this, in how I kind of look at it is this idea of, that, well, I believe personally that we're born through our parents for specific reasons. And there are specific lessons that we learn as a result of being born through them. And that those lessons, I think, are directly related to the things that are unique to us and that we're here to do in the world. And so it kind of connects back to like the sacred wound and the gift, right? So looking at what modern society might call like a broken part, but instead of viewing it as something broken, kind of starting to understand that actually it's a gift. And so that's how I don't view it as broken or something to be fixed, but more of, well, how do we create wholeness out of this? And so, yeah, so I do think you're correct in terms of that. I do agree with that point that, like, I think, and if you just look in our, at our medical industry, if you go to the doctor and you have a knee pain, then they're going to send you to a knee specialist. Whereas maybe it's, maybe it's something psychosomatic. Maybe it's something that's, affect your neck is bothering you and it's causing you to walk a certain way. So there's not like a view of this wholeness. And by wholeness, I mean, not just wholeness in this individual body, but wholeness with everything that we're part of. Those things that are seen and unseen. And so, but if you just go to the medical industry, typically you're going to get, well, knee hurts, we'll send you to a knee surgeon. And that's, I think, more in line with the perspective of something to be fixed rather than like, let's look at the whole and see where we can balance out everything. Or maybe not even balance out, just see what's there. So we have a clearer understanding of what's going on. So that's kind of my view on that and how I like to approach things. And then my background, yeah. So my background, I started in the fitness industry. And then kind of evolved from there, being quite interested in the body and its capabilities and its movements, and noticing like ways that the body was holding tension or maybe not even coming online when we're trying to do certain movements. And that led me to go back to school because I wanted to understand. I grew up in the Bronx, so I always say I'm 100% spiritual and also 100% material, in that like I like to have an understanding. I've had so many spiritual experiences myself, which have been completely profound, and in some cases have healed my physical body. and then like the part of me that's from New York is like, what's going on? I want to understand this at a deeper level. And so that led me to go back to school to get my doctorate in natural medicine with, like I said, field of focus of psychoneuroimmunology. So I really kind of wanted to dig into like, what are the specifics here? Like I geek out on that stuff. So it allowed me to go quite deep into, you know, how the nervous system behaves or typically might react when we have different experiences during different times in our lives, and how those experiences might get locked into the body and then keep us in, you know, familiar ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And then alternately how to, you know, use the body as a way to release some of those chronic holding patterns and or bring some parts of ourselves back online to start being a bit more flexible within the system. And then eventually that change starts changing the way we think, feel, and behave. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, the little that I know about the psychoneuroimmunology is how it has been shown that our inner state of well-being or stress is directly impacting our bodily health, vitality, and immune system.
Right. Right.
And then also how excessive anxiety or fear mongering, and especially if it happens on a collective level, where, you know, let's say a hypothetical pandemic is happening all over the world and population is scared continuously and, you know, from the TV screen, then that will actually can have a much worse effect on the health of the population than a certain pandemic, let's say. Right. So that was something that I was researching during COVID, and it was just fascinating to see that, the reaction to a certain event can be much worse than the event itself.
Exactly. And yeah, when I see that, you know, I think with that, it was for me, in my experience, just watching it, it was an amplification of what was already in each individual. So if you tended to be scared or feel anxious, then, you know, all of the fear mongering, but also the conditions of it, you know, just amplified that. Or, you know, if you tend to go numb, then the numbness tend to be amplified. So I saw that, you know, what happened during the pandemic is just really an amplification of what was already inside of each individual.
With some help from the social media.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's also what is happening, of course, on the individual level, when a certain event is happening in my life and I don't know how to integrate it. Then there tends to be an impulsive certain reaction of closing down around it. And then that can show up in the bodily language as well.
Yeah. I have a perfect example, if I may, from my own experience. Is that okay? Yeah. So it's very interesting for me. This has been progressive, you know, unveiling, if you will, where, you know, my messaging as a kid was take care of everything yourself, don't depend on anyone. And so I grew up, you know, believing that. And part of that was conscious, but most of it was very subconscious. And so how that kind of played out in my life was, well, don't let people get too close to you. Don't let people support you, because then again, subconsciously that meant people might hurt me. So then it created this kind of armoring in my chest and my whole chest cavity. And you could see it oftentimes. I'm a little more flexible now, but oftentimes I would be very, very upright. And that's like the whole armoring there. And then I had this experience actually end of last year, where I was working with like trauma, and I was sitting there and I could feel what I experienced as this scaffolding in my system. where my whole body, even though I was leaning against the wall, I was trying to lean against the wall, and I couldn't, like, it was just this very uncomfortable armoring that I felt that I couldn't kind of get to shake off. And as I was exploring that over the next few days, I had this interaction with one of the people that I was with, and I noticed myself getting very frustrated with him, and he was also getting very frustrated with me. And we were kind of going through this kind of process and this dance with each other, which I'm totally grateful for now. In the moment, it was quite uncomfortable. And as we were kind of doing this dance together, we wound up sitting down and looking at, like, what's actually going on here. And as we were kind of de-blending the sensation that I was having, the sensation that he was having, from the feelings, from the facts that were happening, what I realized in this interaction was my system was going into an automatic interpretation of what he meant, like what he was doing meant for me, which is totally inaccurate. But my subconscious interpretation was, I don't matter. I don't matter to this person. And so then that caused me to, like, reinforce that, hold myself up, don't allow anyone to support you. You have to support yourself, which of course then sends the message to my, inner child, to my subconscious self, that, yeah, you don't matter because you're not allowing anyone to help you. You're not allowing anyone to support you. You just do it all on your own. So it was just a really interesting view of myself, an experience of myself, of how automatic those defenses come online without awareness, right? Without bringing awareness to it and pausing for a moment and kind of separating these, like, well, why am I feeling this way? What am I making this mean? And then once we kind of sat down and were able to de-blend these things, and he also on his side had a similar thing where he realized something I was doing was triggering his, original wound from childhood. And so that was the bit of tension. But again, I feel like I may have gone off on a tangent, but why I brought it up is because I think it's it was such a poignant moment for me to see, how my body responds automatically, sometimes without my conscious awareness, and then to pause for a moment and really get to the deep understanding of, oh, you're triggering my internal belief of I don't matter. And then being able to kind of connect with that part of me and be with that uncomfortable feeling, of, like, it was sadness and grief, and there was a little bit of frustration. And so, to sit with those uncomfortable emotions but really address them at the root, instead of, like, us kind of going, instead of us kind of bickering back and forth. Yeah.
That's interesting. So, yeah, there is a continuous interaction that is happening, just having a physical body immersed in this three-dimensional world. And there is a physical interaction that is continuously happening, but then instead of seeing it as something random, to see how it is continuously pointing to this energy within each one of us, right? So back to the topic of energy, and how in the indigenous traditions also, the worst thing that can happen to someone is stagnation, not allowing the energy to move. When energy is blocked, right? When there is a certain armor or rigidity, tension that is happening in our organisms, and then it prevents the energy from flowing. So in different spiritual systems, that may be referred to as a certain, how to say, obscuration or toxicity. It can be a certain, in some traditions, it can also be referred to as the soul loss, right? As soul loss that relates to this inspiration of just to abide, to be at ease, to rest, to be in awe, inspired, within the world that we're living in, and then losing that. And then that creates all kinds of problems. So the indigenous traditions refer to that sometimes as a soul loss. And, then there is also some perspectives, like in Buddhist psychology, there is the perspective of the hook. In Tibetan, it's referred to as the shampa. Again, when the energy is not flowing, when I get hooked, I get charged by a certain situation, and I get all tensed up and wired up around it. And then sometimes, like you said, it can be carried over in many years of one's life, where I got reprimanded or got screamed off or traumatized by something early on in my life. And then unknowingly to myself, I keep carrying a certain armor. Like I have to do it all by myself. I cannot rely on anyone, like what you shared. And it does serve a certain purpose, because in certain situations of our life, that may be the case. But then there's no need to carry the boat on our head once we cross the river, right? So
Yeah.
it's essential to recognize, first and foremost, in these ancient traditions, it's not to run away from the issues, or I just want to experience the resolution. I don't want to experience the difficulty. That's more of a modern tendency and mentality. But here in the more ancient approach, the point is to really understand the tension first before being able to unravel it. Understand the communication, because it's a lot more than just on the physical level. Like what you shared, you were experiencing that on the physical level in that situation with the other person. But actually, it was much more than that. And it was much more than just that particular situation. And there was a certain pattern of energy that was continuously reappearing in different scenarios of life. So then the first step is to become aware, to see that, yeah, I get triggered, I get closed, I get hooked. And then I can be hooked without getting lost in that. I can feel that I'm tensed, that I'm charged, but I'm not going to make additional tension because I'm tense. Oh, I shouldn't be tense. So I get upset at myself, and then I get even more tense. Right? So the approach is how to relax with not being able to relax as a first step.
Right.
And then to really understand the working of conditioning. Oh, this is how it grabs me, and this is how it takes over, and then all these emotions arise, and I feel frustrated and helpless, and that makes me angry, and then I react and get spun out and close down, and then that experience goes onto the level of the physical body, and then there is that snowball effect, right? So the first step is to actually experience, the earlier the better, when that same pattern is starting to occur, and I can catch it and not go along with it, because essentially I make things real by giving them credit. So if I believe in the fear that I have, then that fear gets so much more amplified. If I believe in the helplessness, then it gets so much more amplified. So then not to feed those kind of disturbances, and not to go along with them, and then seeing how that can transform. But just by understanding it in the head and the mind, that will not make it go away, right?
Right. Exactly. I think, it's funny that, I mean, I think when you think of normal therapy, right, talk therapy, there's some benefit because you do get to an understanding maybe of where your issues come from, but you don't, nothing necessarily changes because you haven't allowed this space for those feelings, right? And so part of, I think part of the, work is first, like you said, to be aware, like be aware of when this thing happens. Oh, I feel scared now. But we mostly will feel a feeling and then jump to an interpretation. Like in my case, I probably felt the fear, but then it got masked by frustration. And then I made it mean subconsciously that I don't matter. And then that was the kind of tension going back and forth. But once I realized, oh, it triggered this unconscious belief that I hold, that I don't matter, then I could just be with those feelings of frustration or sadness, and like I said earlier, kind of de-blend them rather than going to my initial impulse, which was like get all frustrated, you know. So it's the conscious understanding of maybe some of the triggers, or the deeply, or the subconscious beliefs you have of yourself. And then once you can see that, then you can be with those feelings. And that's really, I think, where a lot of the healing comes from, is to be with those uncomfortable feelings to whatever capacity you can at that time. Because, well, what happens is when our systems aren't able to hold those, big feelings for whatever reason, then typically that's when we start repressing them, or numbing, or avoiding, or soothing. And so the work is really, can I be with this emotion to whatever extent I can? Maybe right now it's just to this extent, but maybe tomorrow or next year or next week it's that. And then so the more and more we could be with these uncomfortable feelings, then the more we cannot, go on that familiar path of trigger and then just, do the fear thing or the shutdown thing. We just allow it to be there for however long we need it to be there, and then we could introduce maybe, yeah.
So let's stop here, because that's an interesting point. So this belief systems, right? Like you mentioned, okay, how do I, this is big, and how the tendency is like, how do I be with it? I matter, right? And then initially, that has a place in our lives, but then starting to see how those belief systems, because then in my life, for example, it was, at first it was this I matter, and then at the same time I don't matter, and seeing how I don't matter is seen bad in society, and coming to ancient wisdom traditions, and suddenly I don't matter, how amazing that is. I don't have to constantly worry about my self-pity and self-importance, how miserable I am, and how everything is against me, and how I am someone and I'm supposed to be someone. And instead, actually, the I, this personality construct, doesn't matter, and naturally myself have a place in the world, and I can share my inspiration, and I don't have to be worried about my image and how that looks like. And so then in society there is a tendency to kind of subterfuge that, so to speak, and then try to fit it into, like, well, how can I fit that into my image, and how can I make that into a better performance or appearance, where in reality it is geared towards coming to peace with oneself. And then instead of sharing it something just to prove one's importance or image, sharing something from the heart because I find it beneficial to myself and for others. And so then this process of being with whatever is arising, right, it also inevitably forces us to question who we are, that is being with it. And that is a very essential point that I find is often ignored in modern society, and the different approaches and the techniques, because it's more made to kind of adapt to the current system rather than evolve from it. And so, and I find it to be very essential, because people come often just wanting to, put a band-aid on their image. And okay, I want to be with this overwhelming experience, but I don't want to change myself. And I want some kind of a magical technique, some kind of a, trick in my belt that will make me seem like I don't have issues, and I'm going to bypass it in a way. So I find that,
Right.
this piece is very essential to really see, like, well, who is being with it all? That
Mhm.
person who cannot be with it is not who I really am. I've identified with it. I've been so, embodying this false construct, limited identity, and to the degree that even my body is starting to kind of take on the form of that distorted identity that cannot
Mhm.
cope with life experiences.
Mhm.
So then, how can I evolve beyond that? How can I release that armor that I've been identified? And at first, I don't even know that there's anything beyond this limited false identity. It's like this
Mhm.
garbage bin with my life experience accumulated in it, my conclusions of those experiences, and then my name written on top of it, and I think that that's who I am. Right? I mean, that's how I relate to that. So then,
Yeah.
there is a process of just having a direct insight first, right? Because, yeah, I can be with the difficulties in my life, but how do I be with the difficulties while keeping the focus on the deepest insight of who I am, like the quote that you
Mhm.
shared at the beginning, right? That you said
Mhm.
something that there is a jewel in the lake of your soul,
Yeah.
and there's feeling something mysterious and noble there, right?
Yeah.
But at first, there is not even an awareness of anything beyond this
Right.
limited kind of construct of
Right.
mechanical actions and reactions that are based on ignoring the issues in one's life,
Right.
right? So then it's essential to actually question oneself, not just the issues, and then to see, okay, I have
Mhm.
this fear that is arising. And in the modern world today, and I just had another conversation with a friend yesterday, how in the modern world there's a tendency to run away from the fear. No, you're not supposed to feel bad. And whenever you feel uncomfortable and people that you feel uncomfortable around or situation, just avoid it. Just find your bubble and, just kind of, keep inflating that ego and make yourself feel special and keep
Right.
pretending like that nothing else is there. Where in the living wisdom traditions, it's totally the other way around. The approach is completely different, where actually I have this fear arising, so then how can I transform this poison into medicine?
Right.
So how can I see this fear as wisdom that makes me more aware, more alert, where I don't succumb to this fear. I don't become a slave of this fear. Or the same thing with anger, where the anger can be turned into determination. The
Right.
envy is great to actually practice sympathetic joy, where I can rejoice for the happiness of others. And I can
Mhm.
learn the qualities that allow them to be happy. It's not the things that they have and I don't have, but it's the qualities
Mhm.
that allow us to appreciate life, to rejoice, to find happiness in the simple things. So
Mhm.
essentially, the techniques they help, but it's really the change of perspective of life.
Right.
So if
Right.
you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's so funny because when you were sharing in the beginning that idea of I don't matter, which I was talking about, I had a while back gone to Mount Shasta in California, and there's this cave called Pluto's Cave, and it's probably about a mile walk into the back of the cave. And it's a cave, so it's completely dark. You just have your headlamp on. There's no sound. There's a little bit of sound because there's some moisture. Anyway, so you get to all the way to the back of the cave and turn out your lamp, and it's complete darkness. You're, I mean, not in the center of the earth, but for all sensory input it feels that way.
Uh-huh.
And as I was sitting there in the darkness, no sensory input. It was this moment where that same idea of I don't matter, nothing matters, which typically would arise in me as this, oh, nothing matters, kind of like, small egocentric kind of view of things, to, oh my God, nothing matters. And this, like, so it's the same exact words, but this 180-degree perspective change of it, which then, like you said, very much freed me, at least, it to this, like, oh my God, nothing, like, actually this ancient cave is like, who will be here, has been here for so long, will be here so long after me, and this, like, you know sense of freedom from it, from this idea that, oh yeah, nothing matters, in a beautiful way, though. So it was such a profound moment of a shift in perspective. And I think that's kind of what, at least what I've gotten from what you're saying, in a way, is that change in perspective, right? It's, yes, there's a time to, like, sit with those emotions, and then, yes, there's also a time to, well, let's maybe look at this, and like, well, is this something to be scared, or is this something that we can use this energy of fear to, for some other emotion, or for some other experience? And it's a profound thing when we can. And again, when I say can, I don't mean because we're making it happen that way, but for whatever reason, when our perspective changes and we can see things in new ways. And this, I think, kind of goes back to this idea that I know I've heard you say so many times, this childlike perspective of awe and wonder and curiosity, and being curious about things, being curious about the self, but also being curious about, what is this whole thing, teaching me, showing me, what is this thing that we're all a part of, and just, like, exploring it in that way. I think that's such it's potentially the most profound thing that one can do when we
Okay, so this is a great point.
Yeah.
So this is a great point that you're sharing right now, because now we're coming to this connection between the physical and the spiritual. So in the Amazonian traditions with ayahuasca, for example, the training is that once I can stop resisting, like, there is a separation between me and the rest of the world. And that's, in a way, that precept of nothing matters in its higher perspective. Because I'm not resisting, because I don't see myself separate, because I don't have to prove myself, I can just relax and open up and taste eternity itself. Like what you were saying, that you were sitting in the darkness, and then you saw how, the cave and the mountain will keep being there long after you, maybe, probably. But then, you are able to taste that which is greater than you. You're able to experience something that goes way beyond you. And in Buddhist psychology, there is this principle of emptiness, which people interpret as a kind of like a vacuum void. But actually, it's the emptiness of inherent solid self. It's not that there is nothing that separates us. That we are all interconnected and interwoven, where I end and the universe begins, and where the universe ends and I begin, is a very fine line. Right? So then that allows for the openness, the beginner's mind, the ingenuity, the fresh perspective, the wonder to be present in our life. And then with that sense that you said is the most magical, wonderful thing, right? Like you said. And then naturally, just tapping into that, the language of the body changes intuitively. And so even though that is the most wonderful, magical thing, then I can experience it more easily, maybe in a dark cave under the earth, maybe, maybe in, some kind of a beautiful setting where, the birds are chirping and the heavens are descending into the waterfall. But then what happens in New York City, right? Surrounded by the cement jungle, and people are screaming
Right.
and the cars are honking. So then the first step is to have a glimpse of that, right? That's where our conversation is gearing towards. Then once I have a
Right.
glimpse of something beyond this tense personality construct that is constantly on the defense against the onslaught of the greater whole,
Right.
then suddenly I realize that there's something beyond this construct, and I no longer have to engage with it. And I still do engage in that because it's so ingrained. It's such a
Right.
habit, right? There's this kind of like just this carcass that is
Right.
embedded into our bodies that is habituated to shut down, to feel tense. A certain sensation is arising of discomfort that I experienced long time ago, and automatically I go into that clench. I have a friend that
Right.
refers to it as the human clench, right? As this human clench condition is to clench, to shut down, to close. And then it
Mm.
shows up, like in our last conversation with you that we did live, we spoke about the upper cross syndrome, the lower cross syndrome, and it's essentially expressions of that clench that can happen
Right.
because of so many different circumstances that allow us to identify with limitation. I'm limited in the way that I can deal with life, in the way that I can engage with emotions, with feelings, with people, with situations, with experiences. And then I reach that edge and I automatically go to the comfort zone and I recoil and throw in the towel and I
Right.
become upset and disturbed and I no longer can maintain a coherent conversation with someone, right?
Mm.
So, so then once there is that glimpse, then it's essential to honor it, to nurture it, to water the seed. Again, both in the Amazonian traditions and in the Indian, in the Tibetan traditions, there is this seed of innocence, the seed of the heart that has to be nurtured until it grows into the power of compassion that is no longer intimidated by the world at large. And here, we spoke with you, and you have a very fascinating system of working
Mm.
with unraveling those clenches, right? Those
Yeah.
knots that are occurring in the body. And I also engage
Yeah.
with different practices, both from the Amazonian
Mm.
tradition and also in the Eastern tradition, such as Qigong, that can help with that, the Indian art of being. But essentially, it's this
Mm.
system that geared towards awakening the inherent wisdom of the organism. It's not just being straight or upright. And I love what you
Right.
said in the beginning of our talk, how early on in your life you're always upright, but that was your armor,
Right.
right? And so it's not
Mm-hmm.
only about like I'm gonna just always go walk around. Like that's more like a gym body mentality.
Bodybuilder. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, that's not what it's about, obviously. But then
Right.
it is creating greater vitality, softening, agility. So if you want to share a little bit about what is the
Yeah.
name of the
Yeah.
practice that you're engaging in?
So the name of the practice is body mapping, or you could call it character structure.
Uh-huh.
And this specific one that you kind of referred to is just this process of detangling what I call the body knot, right?
Mm,
So the body knot is basically separating the emotions, the sensations, the interpretations, the impulses. And then once you start seeing how you automatically go to kind of regular feelings and sensations and interpretations, that's that awareness that we talked about, then we can see, okay, then we could kind of pull back from this, universal or observational place and say, okay, I see you. I see you. I see this armoring doing the thing that it does, which is protecting me. But then I could make a different choice, or I could just be with it, or I can, take a different, use a technique, or whatever it is in that moment. But it's really at that point a sense of untangling or deblending these things that are all knotted together. Because
Mm.
if we or I know I do it, and I think most people do it, we have our automatic responses, that clenching that you mentioned, and that those regular responses will tend to will tend to result in a continued clenching in some way, regular thoughts of, or regular patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And so if we want to start shifting those, then we can start working with that clenching. So if we, once we bring awareness to it and understand, oh, okay, this is just a defense. Okay. And then if and when we are ready, then we could start working through the body to see, like, for example, in my case, my case was very, very, very upright. And so as I started working through my body to give my body the message, it's okay to take support. And maybe for me, it was something quite simple as sitting in a chair, and can I feel the sofa behind me supporting my body? Like, can I actually feel it? Can I sense it? Can I allow my system to receive that support? And once I can receive that physical support, in some way my body starts getting the message, oh, it's okay, it's safe to receive the support. Because from childhood, that my messaging was, it's not safe to receive the support, you're going to get
Right.
hurt. So then that makes sense for this armoring. So the body mapping stuff, then we start just looking at a person or looking at the self, start de-blending these emotions, sensations, impulses, interpretations, and then giving the body a sense of, well, whatever it needs, basically. So for me, I needed to be able to receive support. So
Beautiful.
we can work through the body to kind of start retraining, or just teaching the system, okay, it is safe to receive support, or it is safe to speak, to say what you want, because we get all these different messages growing up. And so that's how our body starts armoring around those things, because it's more safe to be there. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
So that's what you mentioned. Essentially, it's encouraging the innate intelligence to awaken.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really love how there is such a connection between the ancestral wisdom from different parts of the world and how it's coming through in our modern society. And the key word, what you mentioned there, for me at least, was if you actually wish to face yourself. Right. So that also often I find that it's kind of like skipped over, like, okay, let's get down to it. But at first, to create a foundation, like, okay, so at first, it's essential to admit to oneself that there is an issue, because often those coping mechanisms, they're working on unconscious level, right? And that's why also there's this just opportunity to learn how to be with it, like what you shared in the beginning. Okay, you know what, at first I'm just gonna be with whatever is arising, and I'm gonna learn how not to get distracted or to run into some kind of instant gratification. And I'm just gonna acknowledge that, yep, I see that it's coming up. Yeah, it's not just happening once in a while or randomly, and there is a pattern to it, and I see that it is taking over my life, and I'm open to the possibility of resolution, because of also sometimes it's possible to just get comfortable. People are miserable, and yet they're comfortable within that, and they don't want to change it. And I find that sometimes working with people who are terminally ill, and then I encourage them to change their diet, to change certain habits in their lives. And there is so much resistance around that. And it's like, well, I'm already suffering so much, and this habit is like the little pleasure and joy that I have in my life, and you're telling me that I have to stop that, right? So definitely, the first step is that there has to be willingness, right? And coming to that shared acknowledgement and recognition, and also to which degree that there is that willingness, and also
Yeah.
not to like overdo it right away, because if I go straight into the worst possible trauma of my life and I haven't prepared myself in any way, it's too overwhelming, and then I will likely get overwhelmed and discouraged, and not be so inspired to keep at it.
Right.
So definitely, I find that it's good to start with smaller issues, smaller tensions and discomforts, and then generate a certain momentum where I can be with what bothers me the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And to your point about the willingness, yeah, I find that to be, I mean, if we think about it, our defenses in some way came online because in we got the message that something wasn't allowed, let's say.
Mhm.
And so you you know then we have to allow ourselves to get to a point where it doesn't feel like somebody else is imposing this, because that's the typically in some way the original wound came up because somebody imposed something on me and I had to defend against it. And so there has to be a willingness to say, okay, this is I want to do this. And then to your next point, yeah, in scientific languaging, if you will, that would be, what you just said is this idea of, well, neuromodulation. It's like we introducing things, like not jumping directly into the original deep trauma, but just can we allow our nervous systems to get a little bit uncomfortable, and then can we bring it back into balance, and then can we go a little bit beyond that the next time, and then can we bring it back into balance, because the possibility of if our nervous systems can only handle this much, but we jump into the deep trauma, then that's just going to blow the system out. So yeah, that willingness, I see, works hand in hand with that capacity, right? The more willing we are, then slow little steps, eventually we get to the point where we can start accessing that deeper trauma. But that's a process that takes, it doesn't happen overnight. Like you said, our modern society wants to click a switch and like, okay, I'm healed now. But that's, the system has this innate knowing, and it has this innate timeline that we can't rush. It happens as we are willing to, face it and work with it and kind of do this dance with it, if you will.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I love that there is a path, there is a way to resolution, and there is also the state of a certain disbalance. And then through the recognition of it, then the path to resolution naturally then starts to evolve. And then there is a lot of support once there is that willingness. And so, Stacy, I want to allow a little bit of time for people who are engaged with us. So if there's any questions or reflections, then our friends are welcome to share, whoever is watching right now. And something that people have written so far is how to creatively be with heavy emotions. So that is also key, I find. The lineages that we work with, they say, it is said that when the emotions are conscious, they become creative. When the emotions are unconscious, they become destructive. And the emotions, is synonymous with life energy. So if I can engage with the processes in me in a creative way, then even the tensions and the issues in my life, then they become the blessings in disguise. And then they come out of the disguise. And so the creative approach is very essential, and to bring consciousness, and that's what we've been sharing with Stacy, is to gradually become more and more aware. And how it's fascinating, people today, they speak about the power of now and all how great we are and how we are enlightened and all of those things, but then people don't like to talk about the power of old habits and the conditioning in our life, the power of unresolved issues or relationships that we have in our life, and without actually how to say deactivating the power of unconscious processes, right, then it's not possible to awaken to our higher potential, no matter how much we talk about the love and light and rainbows and the unicorns that are purging rainbows, then it's not really gonna do it.
Right.
So essentially, it is by understanding the workings of conditioning, how the issues of our lives are continuing to play out until we come to a resolution, until we're able to face it in so many different shapes and forms. So there is this principle in I studied with a friend in my life who was a sports medicine doctor in Siberia, and he worked with the Siberian Chinese from the northern Shaolin temple. And he studied this ancient system of healing. It includes qigong and specific practices and exercises. And he referred always to the hidden sources of pain, where basically, if I'm holding a cactus in my palm and another cactus is in my elbow crease, I will not feel the cactus in my elbow crease until I release the cactus from my palm. Right? So then there's also, I find, a certain experience where certain tensions, they may be happening in my life, but then there are greater tensions hiding more deeply. And then once I resolve the tension, then a deeper issue that has been hiding behind it starts to emerge. That is happening within our lives, and how there is a learning of results also occurs, right, in that way. So so starting from slow and then increasing the momentum. And sometimes I find that it's even hard for people to remember events from their lives until they have found a certain confidence in their ability to face smaller issues. How to say, like safety switches in our organism.
Right.
And what's interesting with what you shared, Stacy, also that I tapped into through your share just now, how actually, okay, even if someone is not fully or don't even know what they get themselves into, but just even trying something out, small scale, and maybe even starting where you shared with me that you sometimes start with an evaluation, and starting with that and allowing people to see how they can face a very minor discomfort, maybe more on a physical level, and then that can also allow a deeper insight into greater issues that are, because the biggest pains are not physical, right? The physical limits what we can have, but then there are, emotional pain can be much greater. It's not limited by physical body, right? So then it can be easier to start with the physical body sometimes.
Right, and to that, to those points, that the physical body is just, well, it's reflecting a few things, but in this instance, it is reflecting in some ways the patterns of holding of the emotional things, right? So by kind of gently doing what you name those safety points, what I would call what would be resources, right? So maybe I would, you might work with someone and give them, if they tend to, for example, and I say this because I sometimes do this, where I lose my own center, right? So somebody says something and I might go off my own sense of connection with myself. So I might have them do some, or I might do some exercises that just help to trigger my sense of center. So that's a safety point for me. It's like, okay, before I go into maybe a group, I might do some centering exercises that help me just to get inside of my physical body. Now, of course, that's not limited to my physical body, because when I go off center, it's relating to my emotional and psychological self. So it has, this multi-layered effect, but that's one of those, as an example, that's one of those safety buttons that one can push. And then I would also say, and I think you were also pointing at this idea that when we start experiencing some more changes in our physical body, emotional body, psychological body, that often those changes will feel uncomfortable. So if we're just looking at the physical body, if there's a muscle that is unconscious that we're working to resource, let's say, to become conscious, often there's pain in that area because it's not been active for so long. And so I think we could use that metaphorically too with emotions, that sometimes when we don't access a certain emotion regularly, that when that emotion comes online, it becomes very uncomfortable. And that's okay. And to not shy away or run from it. And these little incremental steps, I think, eventually lead to being able to, what Robin's question of dealing with those bigger, heavier emotions. And then I think also to another point of that is, I think, which is very important, is this sense of connection. And whether that connection is to, this universe, to the environment, to the earth, to other people, I think is such an important component that, maybe in the Western world or modern world, we don't consider so much. Well, some of us anyway. But this connection, I think, is so important. Martin Prechel, he talked about how with grief, that unless you have a community there holding you in that grief, nobody really wants to go into it, because how are you going to come back out of it? That if you have this community or this connection around you, then it's safer to go into that deep grief, because that somebody will be there to pull you out, or many people to pull you out. And so I think those heavy emotions also, within a sense of connection to community, to universe, to earth, to all of those things also help. And kind of taking it back to even my experience in that cave, it was that like sense of, oh my God, this thing is eternal, and so that I think also is a very important component of dealing with those heavier emotions, and even with the beautiful, joyful emotions, of course, to share those as well.
So yeah, of course, the interconnectedness, and different cultures relate to it different ways. So Martin Prechel goes from his particular perspective, and I know that he really likes to focus on his particular heritage, and he encourages people to work with their heritage. But I find that there is a lot of meaning in relating and seeing the parallels. I find that, for example, with grief, in some cultures, community experience, and in some cultures, and also the shamanic initiations and initiations in Amazon, the yogic traditions, then just the physical community, but it goes into the inner and to the spiritual community, where you're no longer bound just by the physical presence. See the qualities through grieving, for example, that actually it's immortalizing the qualities of those who have passed and continue to live through my heart, because of awakened qualities that I find very deeply related to. And so then what you shared in terms of this physical connection, and of course, initially it can come through a physical connection. The physical will also be connected to the spiritual, and we have this that comes from the Ashuar indigenous people in the Amazon dance, where you start with a physical pain and discomfort, and then you're able to understand the language that is communicating. The deeper that you are in touch with yourself, the more you can understand a certain message that is coming through about unresolved emotional issue or a certain trauma in one's life that hasn't been transformed. And it will keep showing up on a physical level, and as soon as the deeper lesson is taken in, pain completely goes away, even if it has been a certain, like lifelong, hip replacement surgeries I've had with people who for 50 years felt severe message on the level of being. They found that emotional resolution that the hip trauma was telling them, that pointing them about, the hip pain completely went away. It was but then what seems to be magic actually has a very deep working intelligence to it. And so then the pain, the physical pain, it completely goes away in the individual, because there is a certain bothersome quality to it, a disturbance. It's more than just the physical pain, naturally.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Roman, I would like to just, sorry. I was just going to add.
Go ahead. You first.
I was just going to add, sorry. I was just going to add, it was funny because you said hip pain. And to that point, yes. And if I'm unclear, I don't mean that everything is resolved through the body. I think it's this, multiple way street where we can work through the body to help release some emotion, psychological consciousness, and then reverse it. And that it's this interweaving of all this energy. But to that point, I was working with someone last year, and she had a tremendous pain in her hip, and it was really affecting her ability to walk and move. And as we were kind of exploring it and getting very curious about it, and just following her natural guidance, she remembered that her mom used to always say to her, "You're such a pain in the ass." And when she realized that was the messaging that she got as a young child, she said almost automatically the pain in her hip disappeared. And again, it was this talking about this idea that her subconscious belief in some way manifested physically in her body. And so by recognizing it, bringing it released. Yeah.
So, Stacy, I'm not sure if you can see that there's a continuous interruption on our call. I think, it's on our side. The connection here in the Andes is not so good. So while I can, I'll try to wrap this up. And our time is also coming to completion.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely. I love the conversation today and the topic that is coming up to really get to the root of it. and then we can see
Yeah.
how we can engage, with, and like someone shared, that it's so that the tools don't become of a certain bypass, but ways to cultivate spiritual growth and connection to all of the parts and the emotions, and then of course it has a lot to do with release and false identity. And
Right.
it's this identity that is basically has to do with the habitual pattern of life, where I
Right.
keep doing the same thing and I expect a different result. So at a certain
Right.
point, I can catch on to this mechanical repetition, and that's basically the false identity, where I no longer have to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result every time and be disappointed
Right.
from it.
Right.
Um, uh, um, and so there is another one. So, question: my understanding from therapy psychology is that we subconsciously seek out similar situations, people that created our original in that scenario will lead to a different result, ending in healing. I found that often does not, though. So, given this tendency and open up in situations that seem to be set up to rewound folks. So that's a great
Mm-hmm.
question. And essentially, yeah, unconsciously, and that's what is happening in cases with PTSD. And I worked with quite a few war veterans over the year in my line of work, and people with other, abuse trauma. So there is a tendency to recreate the same scenario, right? So there will be a different stage, different people involved, but unconsciously there is a recreation of a certain scenario that hasn't been resolved in the past. And to energy, right? It's not that the universe is out to punish us by keep bringing us in the same situation, but it's intuitively there is this energy that is being our behavior that is formed around creating a scar tissue around that energy, creating a certain coping mechanism. A personality will still be dominated by that unresolved experience. And then we all have this situation maybe where I go around my life, and the littlest thing suddenly triggers a huge improportional reaction to what has happened. Obviously, it wasn't that little situation, but it was this energy that I don't know how to deal with, and it keeps getting bottling up inside of me. And then at a certain point, even the slightest insinuation of that energy will trigger this huge release, right? I don't know how consciously engage with that energy, so it keeps accumulating, 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 and then explodes. And that often is rewounding process. So of course, when we experience the same trauma from our life in an unconscious way, in an unintentional container, is a tendency for that energy to be rewounding or re-traumatizing. However, in the indigenous traditions and other practices in the world today, there is an intentional support where I can be safe to be vulnerable, where I can be safe to reenact the original trauma in a supportive, nurturing, safe container with a higher guidance and a certain deeper understanding of the process. And I can allow myself to go through it more fully. So the safer the container is, the more it's possible to heal and resolve the traumas of the past. And then, of course, it will not be possible if there is not a safe, supportive, and that guides towards resolution. Otherwise, I go through the same trauma and then I keep acting in the same way because there's no greater perspective, a bird's eye view, and a fresh approach to it. And that's basically what we are talking about today is not doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And so, of course, tools, they help to create this therapeutic approach where there is a situation, there is a container, there is no sense that will happen in everyday life circumstances that are not intentional. Someone starts to go through their wounding, through their trauma, and someone else may take advantage of that. There is no intentional safe container. So that's why in the ancient times, and it's also starting new in the modern world today, but it's so essential to have that container, the spiritual community, the support, the friends around you that just wish for you to be well, and also themselves are trying to be well, and there's no secondary agenda, right? It's not some kind of a product to be sold and then people get sick as a result just because someone wants to get rich. So there has to be that deep care for oneself, for each other, people that you choose to work with, whether it's the indigenous elders or the more modern practitioners. In my life, I found that it was so instrumental to take the time and really establish that sincere, human, genuine, caring connection, and the recognition that that is the main focus. To eat, but not to make that kind of compromise the work, the healing work that is being done. So that is so essential to reach on the level of the heart intentions. Was helpful. And coming to the completion, so Stacy, if you want to share a little bit more about just to bring a completion to from your side.
Yeah, so first I want to say I completely agree. Like everything you said was perfectly spot on. I think that container is so important, that sense of safety in order to experience the things that, want to be experienced to lead to a resolution of that. And then, yeah, I think the to just think about in terms of our own individual paths is just, that go one step at a time. You told a story about a woman climbing up a mountain, and you went up the mountain and you were huffing and puffing, and you asked her how she got up the mountain, and she said "Pisi manto," one step at a time. And I think that with this work, it's all one step at a time, and listening to the innate guidance of the self, and maybe also differentiating, bringing awareness to, well, what is the innate knowing and what is the defense, or what is the ego, or what is the conditioning. And so little by little, don't put so much pressure, and just kind of build that up in that way. And that's really what, the lasting, how we engage. I think how the best way to engage is those little steps that we take that, start to make big differences.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Stacy. Yeah. And I look
Thank
forward
you so much,
for
Roman.
us to keep our conversation and our mutual heart intention to help the world awaken.
Thank you so much.
And caring.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roman. It's been wonderful talking with you. Much love, and thank you everyone for asking the questions and listening, and we see you soon.
We look on each other.
Much love. Bye.